I think I'll let this last straggler come in and then we'll get started. One more out there. All right, I think we're good. We'll go ahead and get started. Again, for those couple of new faces, I think, from the last meeting we had, again, my name is Anthony Armstrong, the Director of Planning and Development Services. This is our third meeting, so kind of walk through what this one will be like. It'll be similar to the last one, where we're going to give you a lot of information. And hopefully this is the last meeting where I'm doing most of the talking. After this, it'll be all up to you guys to kind of converse amongst each other and have conversation. This is really just our last kind of push of giving you information, giving you some data. We've collected also the initial feedback from the public engagement so far. So that includes the public meeting kickoff that we had 3-ish weeks ago now, or 3 weeks ago. Also includes the online feedback, and we'll dive into those details on all those different things to kind of give you guys an idea of where was the citizen and public kind of where was it, what was their visioning, where were they at in the process, and kind of what were they wanting to see. And ultimately, y'all can take that into your deliberations and discussions moving forward, and we'll talk again about future things from there. So to kick us off, I think this is just a rough outline of our agenda, what we'll cover today. Charlie kind of went over. I think the first thing that we recognized from the last meeting, and it'll be pretty crucial going forward, is we keep using the term Northgate a lot, and it means a lot of different things every time we use it. And so I think we want to start off with kind of helping set the foundation on what we mean by each of these areas. So we have the overarching small area plan area, right, that we're calling the Northgate Small Area Plan. There's also then the Northgate District, from the city perspective, which is known as the zoning area. And then you also have Northgate, or the bar district, or the entertainment district, et cetera. And I think some people think of Northgate as that district. And so when we have these conversations, we want to make sure that we're all using the same terminology, that we're all using the same words to describe the same thing. And so if y'all could get out your phones, we're going to try something a little technological here. We're going to do a series throughout this presentation. We'll go through a series of different. It's a survey material that we've come up with. You're going to scan a QR code on the screen here in a second. It'll basically populate a survey question for you as we go through the presentation. You don't have to scan it each time. If you scan it the first time, it'll be good to go for the rest of them. So to start, we want to make sure these are kind of the three ideas that we came up with for a name when we talk about the small area plan boundary. So in the next slide, you're going to see an option to choose one of these three. So either what we call the plan, again, looking for the community, essentially, most votes will win. You'll see it in real time. A couple ideas we thought about was the Greater Northgate plan, or Greater Northgate planning area. Could be the North University Small Area Plan, or the University North Small Area Plan, and then also the University City Center Small Area Plan. So those are our thoughts. Again, this is the boundary that you're looking at for that. And so on the next slide, you're going to see this QR code. If you scan that real quick, it is completely anonymous. If you scan that, I'll give you all a good couple of seconds here, and it should prompt you to pick one of them. And then this will update in real time. And essentially, I'll probably give you all 60 seconds, 2 minutes. If you're having issues, let me know, and we'll go from there. I'm glad to see it's working. And outliers out there still, although I think I see the trend. Got about 20 more seconds or so. I think there's about 4 people maybe. I'm gonna call that good. Not sure it would make a difference anyways. All right, so going forward, just so we're all on the same page, and y'all keep me honest too. When we talk about the whole boundary as a whole, we're gonna refer to that as the greater Northgate planning area. So just remember when we talk about it, when you have your discussions, when we're looking at the plan holistically, that'll kind of be how we name the plan. Also makes it really easy to update our graphic material. We can just add the word greater in there and it'll be pretty easy. So next, we're gonna talk about the Northgate districts as far as the city is concerned. And so kind of have 2 different options here. So again, this is when we talk about Northgate, when you look at that original map, if I go back. So again, this area in the bottom left-hand side of the screen, that's called Northgate as far as the city ordinances and the design district and all that's concerned. And so when we talk about this area going forward, these are kind of the 2 different names that we've come up with. I think I've been using the term Northgate proper just to help align us. It is by definition in the code called the Northgate district. We're good with either one of them, but again, just want to make sure we're all using the same terminology going forward. So same thing, if you don't need to rescan, it should just automatically populate on your phone now for the next question. But same thing, if you could fill that out and just let us know. Just about 10 more seconds. Got a couple more this time around. All right. So again, as we go forward, when we talk about the Northgate district, that'll again recognize that entire area in the bottom left hand of the planning area, the 150 acres or so that is the city zoned area of Northgate. We'll continue to call that the Northgate district. So again, just remember, we'll try to be very intentional with these terms and how we write things up in the future plan, et cetera, things like that. That's what that terminology means. And the last one will be for the core or the sub area 1 is what we've mentioned it. It's obviously not a great fancy name. And so obviously I think it's the area that we all know is a pretty large portion of this effort and a lot of interest of the citizens in the community. And so here are the 3 different names that we've heard kind of collectively throughout the process on terms of what different naming terminology could be. So again, this is, if you're familiar with the original presentation we gave, there was a red box in essence that I outlined over this area that we kind of called this sub area 1 district. And so again, here's the 3 options on the left. So either call it Northgate, which I think is what a lot of people maybe think of when they think of the term Northgate, core Northgate. If we do that, just small, I can't think of the word right now, but just a heads up, there is a zoning district called Northgate, so we would have to look at that eventually as part of the process, making sure that we delineate that. Not a huge deal. And then the bar district, I think, is another term that we've heard from the property owners and business owners in this area. And so kind of, well, again, same thing, put it up to the committee. If y'all can go ahead and cast your vote, same thing, should update. No need to rescan. Four more. Should have taken bets. I batted 100 so far, so would have been good. All right, I think there were 2 more from previous vote, but I think it's pretty decided right now. So again, reminder as we go through the process, we're going to call the larger surrounding area. We talk about the whole plan. We're going to call that the Greater Northgate Small Area Plan. When we talk about the bottom left 150 acres, we're going to call that the Northgate District. And then when we talk about the sub-area 1, the core area, we're going to call that Northgate, just flat. A lot of Northgates, but we'll get it straight, just so we all know. But y'all keep me honest. I'll try to keep you honest as y'all go through deliberations going forward. But now that we're all on the same page, I want to follow up on some existing conditions, and this is meant to be a very open question and answer style. Obviously, everyone did schoolyard style, and you're all in the back of the room. Put a couple of these people up front who get to be close to the action. But as we go through it, feel free to ask any questions. Again, this is kind of the last ditch effort, if you will, from staff to give you information. If there are additional things you want as we go through the process and we talk about the next stages, we will certainly look up that information and provide that to you. There was a couple of requests from different people on the committee from the last meeting. After this meeting, we'll send kind of that finalized version of the committee. We'll send all of that information. So there's some requests for different kind of Excel files with some data. There was a series of questions that a couple of different people asked that I responded to, and I'll provide those answers to the whole committee, as well as some data from on rental or leasing occupancy rates as well as provided. And so I'll send all that to the committee after this meeting via email directly to everyone involved. And so first, one of the things that was requested as a follow-up that we wanted to provide was kind of a look at the adjacent neighborhoods in relationship to Northgate. So just to give you guys an idea, all this data is pulled from the American Census data, American Community Survey. And so with this, in essence, you can see what we've done is highlighted in maroon is the sectors that have the highest in that category. And so we essentially tried to look at like-minded zones around the university and how they related to the Northgate area. This is really regards in terms of demographics. And so when you look at the population, even though a large majority maybe from of this area, about only half of it is probably a heavy residential zone. There's, according to this data from 2023, about 9,000 people living in the Northgate small area, the greater Northgate boundary. Already messing up, so y'all keep me honest. The greater Northgate boundary has about 9,000 people. And then we also compared that to, we picked census tracts in essence. And so the boundaries are a little wonky with how you might see, but it's the easiest data to pull quickly. And so when you compare this to Eastgate, which is in blue, and then into Southside, which is in green, you can see kind of a breakdown. Obviously, when you, going through the chart, the median age is higher over in Southside. Basically, Northgate takes the crown on all the rest of them. Having the most non-family number of households or number of population would obviously kind of correlate. Percentage by age broken out. And then when we talk about percent occupied, again, this data doesn't necessarily reflect some data that we'll share with you that one of the committee members was able to provide as far as occupancy rates in Northgate. A little bit more updated, so we'll get that to you guys. It's, I think, closer in the mid-90 percentile for the Northgate area. And then renter status, again, according to the ACS, about 99% of Northgate is renters, and then you can see the others there for the other areas. So we also went back and looked at the fire and EMS calls and got a couple clarifications from some questions that were asked during that process. And so, again, you can see the total amount of fire and EMS calls on the left, Northgate District, the heat map. Again, this is overall, we break it down. There's some requests about day and night. So kind of we talked about that 10 to 4 window and then outside of that. And so when you look at the call by incident type, that was a request to break out what the call type was. So on the bottom left, you can see for Northgate, 85% of our calls were for EMS, 15 for fire, and then 17 for fire prevention. So obviously, so there's some obvious overlap there. That's in essence that some of those calls are dual purpose. They're sending 2 units out potentially, or 1 of each unit out to that call. You can see the breakdown again. You'll see some stark differences here in a bit with PD. The fact that Century Square, again, we do provide fire service for A&M area. We do not provide it PD service necessarily. Yes. Fire prevention, the question was for those online, fire prevention call, what is that? So that is going to be typically a call, could be an alarm-based call. So if an auto alarm goes off, or it could have been a call based on a citizen concern there was no probable cause for fire, but something could have arose. Generally, that's probably going to be more in your high rises potentially. Someone pulls a fire alarm as a prank or something like that. So this is that fire and EMS broken out daytime versus nighttime. And again, this is a heat map kind of. So this shows you on the left-hand side, this is our daytime, if you will. So again, the redder the area, that shows where are they responding to during those hours. So again, this is from 2019 to 2024, the last 5 years. Shows a heat map of where do they frequent their calls when there's a fire or EMS call in the area. And again, same thing with the breakdown. As far as the previous slide talked about the overall breakdown, 85%, 15% for the Northgate area, EMS versus fire, et cetera. On the right-hand side, you can see the number of calls as it relates to the nighttime hours, so 10 to 4. And we'll go through this again with all the data that was kind of talked about last time, breaking out those differences between day and night. But again, this is just to show you, again, heat map wise, heat map style. This is where the majority of those calls are being generated or responded to. One question doesn't directly say it, I think, in the presentation, but to help clarify, that was asked. When we talk about fire and EMS calls, there's a question about which ones are proactive versus reactive. And so when we talk about fire and EMS, 95% of those are reactive. So they're receiving a call, they're receiving something, they're going out to respond to those. On the PD side, as it relates to the Northgate district, that is about 50-50. And that certainly the majority of those calls are going to be in the actual Northgate area. But the reactive to proactive breakdown for PD is about a 50-50 split. For fire, it is very heavy. It's about 95% on the reactive side. So this just kind of further breaks down the number of calls kind of related to that heat map a second ago for fire and EMS. So when we talk about Northgate, you can see on the bottom left is a chart that has the time of day and then essentially the number of calls in the last 5 years that were generated during that time of day. So obviously with fire EMS, there's a large peak in the Northgate area around 1 o'clock in the afternoon, right? Morning, sorry, yeah. 1 o'clock in the morning, and then kind of trails down. Century Square has a couple of peaks leading up to the night hours, and then the rest of them are relatively steady throughout. We also then have calls by day of the week. So as maybe the data has shown on the left, certainly for the Northgate district, as it is more active in that area, you get a lot more calls through that area. So again, when we talk about resource allocation, where it's being spent, some questions on breakout of that data that were asked. Here's coming up some follow-up on that. When we looked into each of the different sub areas, so the Northgate district, Hensel Park, North Point Crossing, Century Square, we looked at the top 5 calls for those areas. And so Century Square, I need to look up what you remember what the FP91 was? You can say it. Okay, yeah, just put that for those online. So the FP91 ordinance violation is basically a violation of the fire code in a building. Could be over occupancy, could be some other level of the fire code that's being broached. There's a SIC call. A SIC call is kind of a catch-all call. Could be if they don't exactly know what it is when the call is made, a SIC call is made out. Auto alarm is going to be something like a fire sprinkler system goes off, or some level of, like a life alert or something like that. Some sort of automated system that makes a call out to fire. That's your auto alarm. Overdose, obviously we probably know what that is. And then EMS PD assist means that PD had made a call and EMS goes out there to assist with the case for potential, some sort of intervention from a health safety standpoint. Major accidents in Century Square was the top call in that area. Again, I think we looked at some crash data. There was stuff along University Drive that would be captured in that Century Square area. We then have Hensel Park had a water rescue, not a whole lot of calls in Hensel Park. So top 5 water rescue made the calls because of the creek in the backside over there. Gas leaks, some other kind of more minuscule things. But again, if you look at the call volumes on the left, it is a very, very low amount of calls, well under, I think that in the double digits for the entirety of the last 5 years. And again, all this presentation along with the others will all be available for y'all online. And y'all got a copy of stuff that we'll talk about here later on with the community feedback, but this one we'll be sure to upload all of this onto the website. What the violations were? Yeah, so I mean, yeah, we can definitely probably provide that more broken out. It's going to be a pain in the butt to look through probably, but in essence, in Northgate, these on the far left, those are the top 5. So they're in order by number of calls. So the most calls being those ordinance violation calls, followed by a sick call. So a sick call is going to be really a large majority of them. That's that catch-all call. If someone calls, they're calling EMS because someone is unconscious or something like that. They're going over to assist them, or they don't know what the exact issue is. That qualifies under a sick call. But I would say, I don't know if we have the percentages broken down, but we can probably provide that. That might be the easiest way to look at it, just what's a percentage of those calls, because the Excel sheets are huge. You'll get lost in the sauce. But we can definitely provide you the Excel sheets if you want, or we can just kind of turn these into percentages, and that might help out a little bit better. So this map is, it's a heat map for the call volumes. It's a little bit potentially difficult to read, but essentially the way it works is that green is the low end of the scale, the middle or the orange is kind of the middle-ish of the scale, and then red would be the most extreme. So again, this is just to show you when we talk about calls where it's a heat map of the time of day that the calls are occurring by sub area. And so again, obviously when we talk about Northgate, the Northgate district, which again includes Northgate, that you're getting a lot of those calls. But again, majority, Chief Mann actually did a presentation at council along with Chief Couch last week where they had broken out this data a little bit, and that those call volumes are happening for both of these, are happening kind of in this area of the day of the week and the time of day. And you can kind of see in the rest of them are kind of scattered out and less frequent overall. So then we go to the police department. So again, this is for total responses. And again, the question that was asked last time was what is the breakdown of those calls as far as proactive and reactive? Again, it's about 50-50. I think Chief had done a presentation, when he did his presentation last week, he had presented on the number of, pull it up. The total calls in Northgate were about what he had reported was about a little under 1,200 or 12,000, excuse me, and about 10,000 of those were in the Northgate area specifically, so the area in red. So what is that, about 3/4? About 3/4 of the calls, 75% or so are happening specifically in that Northgate boundary. And he went over some additional statistics here, but same thing. Obviously, you'll see with Century Square and the Century Square area is going to be very low. Just because we don't respond to calls out there for A&M for more common things. Hensel Park would be a little bit elevated just because the nature of those calls and when they're happening as far as hours are a little bit different. The same thing, broke this into day and night as a little bit counter to the other graph with fire and EMS. The heat maps are kind of similar just from looking at them. So again, the daytime is on the left-hand side. Again, so 4 a.m. to 10 p.m., showing you where the majority of the calls taking place. You then also have the nighttime on the right. So kind of showing again where the majority of those calls they're geolocated when the call happens, where are those happening at. Next, we broke that into, again, as requested, calls by hour. So similar to the previous graph, When we talk about Northgate itself, the calls obviously peak during that same kind of period. Peaks a little bit beforehand, again, because it's about a 50-50 break on proactive versus reactive. So when you're proactive with the calls on the PD side, you're probably going to hit that peak a little bit earlier than the reactive side that fire EMS has. When we look to calls of the week, essentially mirrors almost the same trend as the week goes. As we get into the weekend, spikes up and then kind of trails back down towards the end of the week there. Same thing, we looked at the top 5 call volumes. Again, percentage breakdown, what were the highest percentages of calls. So that was alcohol violation for the Northgate area, the Northgate district, minor in possession, ordinance violation, which could be anything from noise to other ordinances that PD enforces, disorderly conduct, in communication instances. Century Square, the number one thing was the traffic stop, again with University Drive being included in that area. That would have been their number one thing. Communications incident, welfare concerns, follow-ups, high accident locations. So again, this is going to be more of a proactive measure for PD being out in the area of a high traffic, high accident area. North Point Crossing, similar things. And then Hensel Park, primarily traffic stops. Yeah. I don't know. I don't know if Chief was not able to make it. I'm not sure. I can get a walkthrough on what that is, but I would assume some sort of direct interaction. They've done a lot of work in the last 2 weeks. It's kind of crazy. So yeah, they've been crunching. Yeah, no, that's a good question. We'll send that out as a follow-up. Just get some clarification from Chief on that, on what those exactly mean. And then again, the same heat map as far as call volume. So you kind of expect, it's basically more or less the same as a fire EMS. Heavy call volume, a little bit more red or a little more concentration around the Northgate district. It spreads a little bit more than it did on the fire EMS side, but relatively the same kind of image. So the other thing we talked about was permits and reviews. So there was a request to kind of break that out a little bit more granular. And so when we look at it, on the left-hand side is our new construction permits. So this goes back to 1999. The black parts of that line are the number of new commercial built structures. So that's going to be it's very low count overall. You can see the scale on the right just goes up by 2, so not a whole lot happening necessarily. Multifamily is going to be something that was almost purely multifamily. Commercial new, a couple of those in the last couple of years are actually going to include some of the high rises. So probably, I think it was 6 of the high rises were actually developed under a commercial new permit instead of a multifamily permit, with the way that we changed how we did the permitting for them, just from a completely clerical issue, just how we track that because of a building code thing. But in essence, generally speaking, the stuff beforehand is probably going to be some level of actual, the earlier on you are, the more likely that it is a true commercial building or commercial structure related permit. As you go to further years, that's more than likely a high-rise or multifamily style of development. So again, the scale, the chart just shows kind of a when the development interest peaked and occurred. So early 2000s, obviously housing crisis stuff happened around the 08, and then you hit again, as we talked about last time, in the early 2010s, 2011, 2012, really when the rise kind of kicked off as the first high-rise. You saw a big spike in development, and then we've been pretty steady the last several years since COVID, and probably seen a little bit of an uptick. Actually, the last 24 months or so. This is, yes, it's grain of salt, but yes. So it is for the greater Northgate area. Caveat to that being that Hensel Park and Century Square are not permitted by the city. So these realistically only represent North Point Crossing and the Northgate district, heavily influenced by the Northgate district. The North Point Crossing is probably since 1999, is probably only about 5 to 6 permits total. I'm sorry, say it again. So the graph is a stack graph, so it's the number of commercial new and then the multifamily. So yeah, the white represents multifamily direct permits. So that's so something like North Point Crossing was actually done under a multifamily permit that would be on there. And then really since 2020, where you see the last white tick, that was 1 permit. The next couple of years are 2. Those are actually high-rise structures. So everything since 2020 onward has been a high-rise structure. It was just permitted as a commercial new permit. Correct. Again, so we talked about, there was a question about demolition permits and kind of when did the demolition occur. So these are, when you pull a demolition permit, it's a little bit different than a new construction permit. If I build a new high-rise on, say, 5, 6 lots, right, I'm pulling 1 permit. I pull 1 building permit to build that structure. But if I bought the 5 or 6 lots, and let's say there were duplexes on one of the lots, each individual structure that existed is 1 demo permit apiece. So potentially you could have 6 demo permits to build 1 new structure. So just keep that in mind when you look at the numbers. It's obviously significantly higher for demos. But for instance, there was, and we'll look at a map here in a second, 500 College, Maine was a project, I think had almost 8 structures on it. Each one of those was demoed. Each one of those was a demo permit. There actually isn't a structure there right now because that project fell through, but just to give you some perspective. Same thing, so a remodel permit. A remodel means that they didn't expand the footprint of the building. So it could be a facade improvement. It could be when Antonio's Pizza went to the Dollar Slice Club, for instance, that was a remodel permit. They came in and pulled 1 permit, did that interior remodel and any exterior work, and that was considered 1. And so, again, over the years, you've seen a little bit of an ebb and flow, nothing really maybe consistent there, but just for your 2 cents to consider how people have redeveloped and remodeled their own personal properties or their individual property. It doesn't mean that it was torn down and rebuilt into a high rise. It would have been, if it was built and expanded, that would be an addition permit, which there are only like 1 or 2 of those, which is why they're not included. Then we talk about development permits and site plans. Those are kind of related to new construction permits. Essentially, again, if I do a new high-rise in Northgate or I built a new building, like a gas station or something, I would pull a site plan permit. That's 1 permit that looks at the site, and then I have 1 building permit. So they're almost paired in a way. So some things, if they don't need a site plan or they're already they already have one, they don't fall into that category. But ultimately, we see a lot where site plans happen ahead of time because they're trying to get an idea of what they're going to do, and then that may or may not come to fruition. So you're going to see a little bit more site plans overall than new construction permits, but not by much. Again, so this is a map that I talked about that'll kind of give you an idea that you guys can use. And we'll give you a lot of exhibits because I think that helps a little bit more than just data numbers for y'all to consider when you have conversations. In essence, we looked at this a little bit last time, but we went and kind of updated it and cleaned it up a little bit so it makes a little bit more sense. Everything in blue is something that was a new build. So something that has happened where since the previous plan, there was an improvement made on that property to develop something. So in the top left of the screen is the high rise, Louise Avenue, First Street, all that. Those had redeveloped into high rises. You've got a couple things under construction that are also in blue. So again, on the far right-hand side of the Northgate district, up against where it says College Avenue, that's currently under construction, is the new high-rise where the old Harry's was. You have the A&M property to the north. We've also shown the city's parking garage on the map, as that was part of the development as the city went, as part of the original Northgate plan, that was added. And we also have permitted. So everything that you see in orange is something that we have in right now for permitting. So those have submitted permits. They're not issued permits. There are projects that could happen, could not happen. We don't, it's all public record because they submitted to the city. It's all open records request. It's all available online. It's on our new development list whenever they submit those applications. But they haven't gotten a permit to actually start that construction, but they're in looking at the process. And for reference, all 4 of those, or looks like more, those are 4 individual or 4 different individual site plans and building permits. They're all for high rises, just for y'all's knowledge. Again, when we look at the rest, blue is again kind of developed property. And then anything in gray is what's considered vacant land. So vacant land is intentional in the fact that there is truly not an improvement on that property. There isn't some existing, an improvement could be that, everything on near where it says Dogwood Street, all of that is kind of older rental housing that's still considered to be developed. It's just not a vacant property. So again, when we talk about vacant property on this map, and when you look at it as y'all have deliberations in the future about what you want to see in the area, those are your kind of raw pieces to kind of that are more malleable than the others. Certainly, everything that you see in blue at one point probably for the most part had something on it. They tore it down, did with demo permits, et cetera, and then built something new. Even on the A&M property for Century Square, they did the same thing. So this is, again, we talked about we did a bad job of displaying the property taxes last time where we just did O&M. So this is everything. This is your true tax rate. So this doesn't break it out from O&M and debt services. This is your full 51 cents per hundred of your tax rate. And so again, this is looking at on the left-hand side, the Northgate district. So this is what it brings in from a residential standpoint. So again, your the high-rise multifamily, any of those residential rental units in the back, et cetera. That's what they bring in from a property tax standpoint. The commercial businesses are the black ticks on the bottom. Again, when we break it out per sub area, this is in essence the same information, just updated to include the entirety of the tax rate. So when you look at Century Square, they bring in a little under 600. Northgate covers around right under 300, and then North Point Crossing about 100 or so thousand. And then again, we look at residential. Northgate, obviously, we've seen a lot of development. A lot of our permit growth has been in residential permits and high-rise and things like that. So of course, we haven't seen a whole lot of commercial growth, so it's relatively stagnant. You've seen a lot of residential growth, so it's continued to climb. North Point Crossing has been relatively stable the last 5 years. Century Square hasn't added necessarily a ton of residential since that first initial kick, but they've gone in and out with commercial development throughout the years. Yes?
Okay, question about the commercial versus the residential here. So like the high rises have been required to build commercial space on ground. Space that black.
Yeah, it is in the black, correct. Yeah. So the commercial businesses that would be in the residential high rises are considered in the black area.
But a lot of those have never been leased.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, just for those online, the observation made that a lot of the areas underneath the high rises haven't been leased, and we recognize that as well as staff. Certainly could add to that value if they were being leased for some high intense uses or higher uses. But yeah, in general, obviously, if you've got 22 stories of residential and 1 story, half a story of commercial, it's going to make it's a pretty one-sided coin. So then we talked about other revenues. So that was another question asked for us to go look into. So this is the parking revenues generated by the city. So when we try to look at other revenues that the city brings in the Northgate district specifically. So on the left-hand side, you see the total revenues generated from parking. So this includes the surface lot as far as where they pay for parking. It includes the garage. So the garage is as a collective of daily use, which is, you can see on the graph, they're all labeled by what they are. There's daily use, and then there's leases. There's about 780, give or take, spaces in the garage. 719 spaces in the garage. And so think about 420 of those are for leases. Obviously, if they're not used, they then get used potentially for daily rates or can be. But you can see on the kind of the history of revenues. You then also have fines. So the fines are going to be basically parking violations. So if someone parks on a street meter location, goes past their 2 hours or whatever they allotted, that generates a parking fine. You can see where we collect revenue there. Obviously, you can kind of see, as we all would expect during COVID, pretty big dip because people weren't going out. They weren't using the areas to park. And then we've been seeing some pretty consistent growth as we go. But again, we get about 1.6 million or so in revenue from parking in Northgate. That being said, it cost us about 2.2 in the budget. A little bit grain of salt there, but the budget for the Northgate operations is about 2.2 million. So we're spending for Northgate operations for this fund. We're spending about 2.2 million. That does include a fund transfer which is related to some other things that is well above my intellectual ability. I think with debt services, things like that. But ultimately, I think the actual use of personnel out there is about 1.5. So the personnel use is a little bit under, but we also have assets. They have trucks, they have maintenance, et cetera. You put all that together, and it is a bit in the negative as far as directly supporting itself. But that's ultimately a council policy if they want to have complete cost recovery of that system. Yeah. That is just the Northgate operations out of community services. So yeah, that does not include that's the same fund. So in the budget book, it's like page 126. If you want to quote me, it's in there closely, roughly, hopefully. But there's a page in there that talks about the fund. I mean, it breaks down basically revenues versus expenditures. At the end of the day, it is a negative, but again, that is just for that operation unit. So that's actually ran by community development, that department. It doesn't include PD or stuff like that. Justin. Not quite. So the question or observation, I guess, for those online, again, was when you total up all the expenditures across, so you get about 3 million. We'll say about 3.250 in property taxes. You then take in the 1.6 plus a little bit from the commercial. We've got a little bit under 3. So if we take a round number of 5, we're generating 5 million in revenue, but we're spending about 2.2. Again, that is just for Northgate ops as it relates to the garage and surface parking. That does not account for anything related to fire service, PD service, or in any sort of other. The 2.2 is strictly just for this parking fund, the parking garage and the surface lot. That's all that covers. So 2.2 is being used for that. There's still obviously there's I think at one point Chiefs 2 years ago I presented a slide to council. I think it was around 2.8 for just fire to operate in the Northgate area was their expenditures that they had projected. The other funding source we get is hotel occupancy tax. So that was another question raised. Again, the only hotels in the area are the 5 that you see here on screen. For legal reasons, we can't break them down by individual, but we can break them down by area. So this is what the city collects from hot tax in each sub area, really just 2 of them, because there's Calvary Court and the George that are in Century Square. You then also have the 3 along Texas Avenue. And so you can see on the left kind of the hot revenue over time. Again, COVID is a pretty obvious blip in there. And you can see that Century Square is the maroon color in the back. It has definitely picked up and is continuing to rise as they develop that out and it becomes a good complete site. And the Texas Avenue is about getting back up to par, kind of those pre-COVID levels. Again, so you're looking at about 4 plus 11, it's about 1.5 million in hot. Hot's a little bit different than the other funds. While yes, it does count towards revenue that the city generates, hot funds have very specific uses, so they can't be used for just anything. There's a very regulated list of items that hot funds can be used for, but they could be used to try to go and broach different things or have try to generate economic incentives or events or things like that. Something that can help generate more additional hot funds is something you can use hot funds for. Is a good way to think about it. So if you can bring some level of tourism or some level of night stays to an area that helps generate your hot tax, you can then use the hot tax to fund that endeavor as a city. That's a good general way to think about it. It's a lot more complicated than that, but I don't believe so. Can you fund fire, EMS, and police? Yeah, you cannot. Right.
That's right.
Open parking.
Have to show that it's competition field, which will. I would just tell you it's.
I'm going to try my best to summarize that for those online. Yeah, basically, yeah, hot is very limited. It was kind of the conversation that was just had, been basically different ideas of what you can use that for. Basically has to be something that is going to generate potential other hot funds, or we can prove that it's bringing an economic benefit or tourism piece of the city. There are some ideas thrown out about a parking garage and some green space. And so just so those, if there are any online, I don't actually know, but just so everyone knows. All right, next. So this is from, the city has recently started using a thing called Placer AI, thanks to our Michael Ostrowski over in Economic Development and Tourism, our Chief Development Officer. So he kind of shared some of this information with us, or the ability to look this up. So I'm going to walk through this and kind of what it means. So what this does, in essence, it's a system that uses pings off of your cell phone to help generate data and information. So it might not be 100% accurate, obviously, because people can have different settings on their cell phones, different, maybe a phone, not a phone, et cetera. But in general, the left-hand side shows number of visits, and the middle shows number of visitors. Why that's important. Number of visits could mean I could be one visitor, I go 10 times, I pop up 10 times on the left-hand side of the graph. If I'm a visitor, I'm just one person, it can delineate that in the what it uses for its indexing, and that just that constitutes you as a visitor to the area. And then visit frequency is basically just kind of that average, if you will. So the number of, if I am one person, on average, I'm going 3 times to the Northgate district in spring of 24. So again, this just kind of shows a trend from when we started accessing the data. So spring, summer, and fall of last year, you can see kind of a trend. Obviously, the Northgate district in spring into summer kind of lowered. Obviously, with the football season in the fall, we picked back up. You kind of see the opposite, ironically, in Century Square, which is an interesting thing to see when we saw the data. But maybe those patrons are reversing where they're going, right, during the season because of the football season. The rest of them are pretty consistent between Hensel Park, North Point Crossing. Not a whole lot of difference there. Really, the big kind of movers are between Century Square and Northgate. So again, this is from a tourism standpoint. Where are we getting those visits, and what do those visits look like? So again, you're looking at around 1 million visits in the fall of 2024 for Northgate district, and then 600K for the fall in Century Square. So again, we'll send this to y'all. This is some pretty interesting information we saw. We've been playing around a lot with the Placer AI software. So as we come across different things, we'll be sure to share that. It's definitely some interesting data that we've seen, and it's definitely a neat tool for us to kind of use as we go through the process. Using the same software, we can break it down a little bit more granular. So this is, again, by hour on the left, so similar to the graphs we've been looking at for fire, EMS, and PD. Kind of breaks out Century, again, looking at Century Square and the Northgate district specifically. Century Square definitely has the most daytime traffic throughout, and then a pretty big peak in the nighttime traffic for Northgate. And obviously, as Century Square probably closes down, it tends to kind of die off and wane North Point Crossing is a pretty consistent. There's probably some level of effect that people are always there living. I think that maybe kicks into that, or the fact that there are businesses below the same places people are living, and then the hotels and stuff like that obviously probably play into that a little bit. When we look at daily visits, again, this just breaks it down by the day of the week. And so again, the highlights being the Northgate District and Century Square, pretty even throughout the beginning of the week. And then you see Northgate come Thursday tends to take over as the number of visits per day. Certainly they both increase as we get to the weekend, as you would think. But again, Northgate really takes over Thursday and kind of it reigns king for the rest of the weekend there. With that, another thing obviously that we talked about last time, but just again to put it back up here, is the sales tax and estimated mixed beverage tax. So this is just for Northgate and Century Square. Where are we getting sales tax and mixed beverage together? We can't break that out. We don't get that data broken out enough to make that kind of a separation between sales and mixed beverage tax because of how they're calculated from the state and given to us. But in essence, this just kind of, again, shows you that projection that about 2022, they were pretty even. And then since then, again, as Century Square has continued to develop that retail sales component, they've continued to kind of grow in what they bring in. And again, this is that sales and estimated mixed use tax is what the city receives in revenue from that. So it's not, that's just our portion of the total. There was a lot of conversation last time and even in the first public meeting about parking. So when we talk about parking, the map shows all the different parking areas within the Northgate District and what we would call a public garage, but it's kind of private. So the Century Square garage is shown on here. It's obviously a public garage for those patrons to go there, but is not owned by the public. It's not public property. It's not the City College Station like the parking garage in the surface lot. But generally speaking, I think we would all assume that is some level of public parking. Likewise, the commercial businesses for North Point Crossing, or what's left of them, there's a parking garage for you to go use there as well. And so we identified that one. You can see throughout the map kind of the different locations of parking. Generally, I would say parking in Northgate and where the areas where there might be a hole or where it looks like it's been removed, that is likely almost entirely due to the high-rise construction. When there is a high-rise built, excuse me, in Northgate, it requires a 26-foot aerial access lane for fire service. So basically, they go out there with a ladder truck. They have to be able to go out there, set the outriggers out in the truck. They need about 26 feet minimum to do that. When you look at a standard city street, it is only about 27 feet wide. And Northgate is an older street or an older section, so in some cases it might not even be the full 27. It might be kind of in that range just because of the nature of the area and how old it is. But that's a lot of times why you'll see it correlate to where there is no parking along where you probably identify there's a high rise of some sort there. And again, this is just public parking, so areas at the city minus the two Century Square and North Point and Northgate District. This is where you can publicly park. And so in addition to that, we totaled up the number of parking violations. Obviously, you can see the percentages there. The biggest would be that the meter expired and they weren't back at their vehicle or didn't refresh it, et cetera. And the other violations for kind of why they got a ticket. Yes. Yes, so that is, I pass it. That is this. Yeah.
And also these citations.
So total fines is the line in green on the right. So yeah, in citations, there's about 400,000 last year generated in citations. No, that would not include. Yeah, we did not pull any revenue generated from citations from PD as far as like ticketing for MIPs or things like that. Maybe. I don't want to promise. I can look. It might be some level since it's through the court. We'll have to look through that. We had tried to pull some stuff on like utility information, and that got really problematic because there's a lot of legal things around people's utility bills, so we weren't able to get that information. But we can definitely look. That's a good question. Yes, sir.
So I know this is not in this. The 16.
There, I think.
Yeah, right there. Okay. So a few years ago, 5 or 6 years ago, they were planning a big parking garage at the open road and, heard nothing about it in a long time. Away from the university, y'all know. Because if we give up the service parking lot behind the city, my understanding from bar owners in the past, there was a lot before the pandemic. A lot of people were parking at university, Texas A&M parking lot,
Mhm.
and coming across the street to Northgate. I don't know what's now, but if you lose the parking garage behind the chicken, I'm just asking this. Not, no, there's going to be 100 parking spaces replaced. There would be, there is very little parking in that third of.
Mhm.
So I was curious about any.
Yeah, so yeah, just to summarize the question. So the question was kind of about what is parking looking like on the A&M side of University Drive, and then some concerns over the surface lot and what happens with that long term. Again, just at the last meeting, council rejected all of the bids for the surface lot, so that discussion is kind of back at ground zero as far as that goes. There's a little over or right around 100 spaces in that lot right now for the surface lot. And then obviously across the street, you mentioned there was in red circled is the existing garage that can be parked from A&M standpoint. As far as their plans for the hard corner area of Welborn University, was it Welborn University or Welborn, Texas, you were saying?
Well, it's university.
Okay, yeah. So,
We redid the park
right.
there over the last 10 years. And
Yeah, so there was conversation about basically what is the university looking to do over here. They had some previous conversation. I would say that's probably a good question when we get into the probably actually the next meeting when we talk about transportation connectivity. Probably something to ask the Texas A&M reps if what that path is. I'm not aware of anything specifically. I know obviously at some point they came through and built some more modern. They built newer apartments in the last decade or so. At least since I've been here, I think they had built or just come out with some apartments across from Boyette area. I don't know if that's where they plan. Obviously, I think with the capacity study, my understanding is that they do look to add some additional housing units, or that was one of the requests in there. Maybe that's an area we're not entirely sure. I think ultimately when we get into the discussions, there's some Texas A&M reps here, and they can probably speak to that specifically about parking options. But I'm not aware of everything personally from our standpoint. Moving on, so there was some conversation again to show the bus routes. And so again, just to give you all an idea of where is the public transportation. And so we've got the two different main users of bus routes in the area. Brazos Transit District is the green line. So that's kind of what are their normal routes that they take throughout the community, throughout the area. And then obviously the biggest one that I'm sure we're all aware of in the area is Texas A&M. So this is the bus routes that they have. Obviously, they will change from time to time with construction as things go on. There might be some changes due to construction in the area. Another thing to consider, and I think at the next meeting, one thing that we'll probably present or put down as a topic conversation to get you thinking is, what would Northgate look like if it was one-way streets? So what are the thoughts on if we turn Northgate into a one-way street district, something similar to a lot of more, when we think of a more downtown area, a lot of areas do have one-way streets. City of Bryan has some one-way streets in downtown Bryan, for instance. What does that look like? Is that an option here? What does that do? Obviously changes some things, but can certainly help create a lot of predictability in the area, which can help out with a number of things. Again, so we talked about the crash data last time. There was another request again just to break this out day and night, where we agreed that 10 p.m. to 4 a.m. mark. So again, left-hand side shows your crashes during the daytime for the last since 2015. That's how far back we got the crash data on. As you would expect, the intersections, the major intersections, are kind of your heat areas during the middle of the day, and really very similar for the nighttime. Just a couple of extra points right outside of Boyette intersection with University, and then College Avenue, a couple of increases there as far as accident location. And then this is the crash data broken out, which was also requested. So again, the left-hand side shows the number of crashes by hour. So again, the crashes are a combination of all the crashes in the last 9 years, added up by time of day. So in the Northgate district, most of the crashes are happening around 1 to 2 a.m. In the Northland Crossing and Century Square, basically most of them are happening during the day, tail off at night in those areas specifically. Then we break out, Hensel Park doesn't have really any roads on it, so remove that from the list. But when we talk about Northgate, there has been a little bit under 2,000 crashes in the last 9 years. 2/3 of that are during the day, a third of them are at night. You can see the others is about 80-20 breakdown for Century Square and North Point Crossing, with 350 in Century Square area, 642 in North Point Crossing. Obviously, again, going back to the heat map, you've got the intersection of University and Texas as one of the main areas of crashes. That's going to be captured in the North Point Crossing area for those statistics. We look at the number of alcohol related. So basically, when they after the crash was when they performed some level of alcohol testing or led to the cause, about 12% of them in Northgate, and then combined in the next two areas were the same. When we look at the daytime contributing factors, what were the main causes? Again, broken out by percentage. So failure to control speed is the most in Northgate during the day. It's the same across the board for all of them. It's the number one thing is basically some level of speeding violation. Then we look at basically yields, stop signs, failure to yield, and different things like that are kind of unrelated or all related. And then for Northgate, 8% of those in the nighttime have been related, or failure to control speed, and they had been drinking was listed as their cause. But generally speaking, by and large, basically failure to control their speed and not yielding at stop signs and yield signs correctly, which is probably the most common traffic violations across the city in general. So there was a request on the 5 different fatalities that were mentioned last time in the area. So this is just the more specific detail. There hasn't been a fatality in the greater Northgate area since 2019. There was basically 2 back-to-back, 9/13 and 9/14 in 2019, on completely opposite sides of the greater Northgate area, both vehicle accidents. One vehicle accident, 1 pedestrian accident. And then back in 2015, there's 5 total fatalities. There were 2 in 2015, 2 pedestrians that were hit. Both the pedestrians had been drinking. They had failed to yield the right of way to a vehicle. They basically ran out into the street, and the car was speeding down the street and hit them. And then same thing, there was in 2019 with the pedestrian crash on Texas Avenue, and then again there was another crash on Texas Avenue, roughly in the same location in 2018. So just a little bit more information that was asked for on those different fatalities mentioned last time, just breaking it down. So this, we were trying to figure out how to put this information best out. There's certainly a big thing to consider in Northgate when we talk about mobility and traffic, things like that, is solid waste. Solid waste is, if you talk to anybody who's developing in the area, is a huge hurdle for them to try to figure out how do they handle solid waste. It's a big issue for our code enforcement in our Northgate operations, as far as, you've got containers potentially in the street for multiple days or days at a time. They're there for long hours. They're in the sidewalk blocking pedestrian access. So solid waste is definitely a big thing that's come up in the last several years with Northgate, especially as, again, the city, I don't think we ever expected to have 22-story high-rises through that area like we did. They obviously generate a lot of trash. That trash has to be picked up regularly. Where does it go? And so coming up with some things for that are going to be important. This data was kind of the best we get. We tried to look to get some idea of routes, but they changed so frequently it didn't really make any sense to get that to you in anything. So when we look at collection days, it's basically taking the number of collections that they do in any given day. So basically how many stops roughly, some places might have 30 stops. They've got containers, multiple containers. So how do we, we're taking multiple pickups that day. But in essence, this is how many collections they're making each day throughout the week. Large majority of them are on Monday, but there are several places throughout a lot of high-rise, a lot of commercial businesses. They have the option to get trash pickup potentially every day. And so a big thing that even the city has, we have our own compactor in Northgate. It is a massive help to operation standpoint if you are on a compactor. It makes a big difference for our sanitation crews just from how much time they're spending. It also makes it to where we have to be out there less often if things are on compactors. So just something to take into consideration or think about. Right now, the city doesn't have any regulations on how we can't force somebody to use a compactor. We can make sure that they have to, whatever system they propose has to be able to be serviced. And so you can kind of nudge them in that direction, if you will, if they can't logically make sense to do kind of individual containers. But we don't have anything right now that says you have to be on a compactor at a certain at a certain point. And so different things to consider as y'all go through, and that's probably for 2 meetings from now where you talk about different regulation things, if that's an idea to consider. So this is really probably something that, and we'll get this to you, this is probably my favorite map we've come up with so far, even though it stressed her out a lot to put it together. But this took all the different master plans that we kind of have for the different areas around and put them into one map, as well as the different crossings that were mentioned in the university plan that we talked about the first time. And so really what we'll probably do is make sure y'all get a copy of this map. And for the next meeting where you talk about connectivity, different options, and how do you make these interplay with each other. But this is, again, I think there was a request to just get a copy of the different master plans throughout the area. We try to take that a step further and get that all on one map so you can look at it holistically, not just each individual plan. And so this, I think, is a really helpful and telling map, really showing what's planned out for the area in Hensel Park and Century Square, what the city of Bryan's doing to the north of us here, and University Drive itself. But again, this will be a good thing for kind of some homework for y'all when we get to the next meeting to kind of use this on. Obviously, you have an idea of what all these other places are doing, and so you can kind of fill in the blanks, so to speak, as we go through the process on what you want to see in different areas and how you want things to be interconnected. Yeah, yeah. So the question was, does it include the underpasses, overpasses stuff? Yeah, so it's probably a little hard to see on the screen there. And even when you look at it up close, you'll have to probably reference the different, how those look. But yeah, there's the different under overpasses here throughout the area. And those are the same. Yeah, that one's, so this one on Boyette, there wasn't a close-up of. It's actually in the back of one of the images I showed in the previous presentation. But these four right here, the conceptual drawings of those are in that previous presentation that have each of these four crossings in them. The one that has, I think, the biggest difference is actually this section. That has, I would say, maybe two, and Jason, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the two different options that have the biggest difference in cost is there's an option that basically each crossing here. I'm just going to color that in, sorry, because I messed up. Oh, I lied. Starting over. But each of those crossings there's the obviously cheaper option where they're their own individual crossings. There's another option where these are connected. And so it is all of that as one giant pedestrian way, corridor, whatever you want to call it, over, and University would go under. And then all the rest of them are really just kind of those individual concepts that I showed, at least currently. But I would say as of now, with the studies that were done, that would be the current direction for them, would be something in that vein. There's a certainly conceptual drawing subject to some level of change and input as they go through the process, funding, things like that. But those are definitely the intents for what they want to be. I would say the biggest thing would be if there's a preference from the committee on Boyette to College, Maine, is that all one, or is it just, are we good with just the two crossings? Right, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and I think the previous presentation had the two different conceptually on them, but yeah, we can try to parse those documents out more directly to send as like an individual file. Yes, Justin.
Thanks for that.
Oh,
All the way this way.
oh, you're talking through here and then the plan that goes down
Yeah, that goes down that
here.
way.
Yeah, so that's, we can definitely throw in, I think, the Northeast Gateway plan image potentially right here, just because it's in the planning area. Down here, we can look at that. My only comment on that would be that it's not a master plan in the same vein that like the Century Square or the Hensel Park or even the Oak Terrace thing is. And it in essence is baked into the city's comprehensive plan. So it's what the city envisions as far as if they were going to come through to do development or rezone property, et cetera, we're going to look for them to align with that vision that was adopted during that planning effort. But it is not the same level of someone gave us the blueprint that they're looking to do, if that makes sense. But we can look at that and see what that looks like and kind of play with it and maybe kind of bring that back. Certainly, that's probably a good point. We probably throw in, at least for the inside, the planning area, throw that in there. Right.
So when you add that to now,
Right, sure.
probably a bit.
Daniel.
Excluding down by Century Square, what is the reason? Traffic stops and pedestrian.
So the question was why are all the crossings there? So the original proposal was around close to $500 million to do all of University under. So that was a giant pedestrian scale, the entirety from Welborn to Texas, basically. This is significantly less. Basically, that was turned down because it is in essence it's not feasible to do that. And so we asked them to go back, come up with some different ideas. The consultant come up with some different ideas, so they came back with these different cross sections. I would say the biggest thing is when we look at how pedestrian traffic works in the area and how it interplays with the vehicle traffic, the more you can separate those two, the better off everybody is. The better off your traffic flow is, the better off you can get people in and out. Especially when we talk about University Drive, it's essentially at its limits, right? We're not going to make it, you can't really expand it without a whole lot of work. I mean, you've got a high rise now on the way, you've got basically a high rise from A&M on the other side with some of their buildings. You're not going to get any wiggle room there. So now you start dealing with timing. So how do you shutting down the entirety of that corridor for 30 seconds to a minute, over the long term, you can start talking about basically opportunity cost lost because people can't get to where they need to be going back and forth. And so that's one piece of it, but also just a pure safety standpoint. We want to make sure that people have safe crossings. You want to highlight these key areas where we know people are generally crossing, where it makes sense to put some level of crossing in there and then get them across safely. And then the more that we can make sure they don't interact with each other, the better off that we are from a safety standpoint for everybody in the area. And so now I think all y'all should have gotten a copy if you checked in with Ashley at the front of the stakeholder feedback. And that's really because I don't want to have to read this all to you because I've already talked way too much and y'all are probably tired of hearing me. But I promise this is hopefully the last time. We're kind of go over that a little briefly. And I'm just going to really touch on some high level aspects of the feedback that we got from that first kind of meeting and then additionally online. So again, the map on the left is kind of the current online feedback to date that we received. This is from the hub site. One thing to note here, there's about 130 or so comments that were generated online, and the rest of these are basically comments that we've inputted that when y'all if y'all were here for that first meeting, you did a mapping exercise. We came through, we digitized those comments. Basically, we just took what you wrote down, put it in the system so that it was all up there, and you can kind of see. So again, an overwhelming amount of change in ideas for the area. A couple things to note. The written comments are probably a little bit more they're probably a little bit more evenly distributed. But one thing I do want to make sure that you are cognizant of, so there was, again, about 130 comments posted online. Of those, there's probably only about 17, maybe 20 individual contributors. So in an instance, one person contributed 60 times by themselves. So of those 130 comments, 60 of those is one person. So keep that in mind when you take that feedback in, you think about it, that it isn't necessary, it might not be a true collective of the community. And that's kind of why we've got you guys here. The input and kind of their ideas and everything is certainly great and welcomed. We want to make sure that y'all understand that this isn't like 240 people gave you their feedback. It's probably more in the vein of 50 to 60, because I would say the in-person comments were probably pretty well distributed because we basically made you do it. we told you to provide some level of feedback. So there are about 100 of y'all in the room, probably got a decent amount of different thoughts or ideas or combined efforts there. But again, when we break out the data for online, it is anonymous. It is time-stamped though, so it's pretty easy to tell if you're commenting at 11:01, 11:02, 11:03, 11:04 on the same day, probably the same person. So that's why I say it's probably about 17 to 20 people, give or take, that have commented on the online map so far. But again, it very, very clearly one of those was 60 comments individually from one person. So again, when we talk about, as we go through this, kind of what were some things that people wanted to keep, they wanted to keep the park area, obviously keep it maintained and accessible, not block it off, not do anything to help, not to prevent access to it. There was some general thoughts on keeping the sidewalk aesthetics through Northgate. As mentioned last time, Northgate does have some elevated sidewalk requirements as it relates to the design district in the Northgate district. So trying to keep that and some general aesthetics up with the area was mentioned. As we've talked about before, and as I've kind of tasked y'all with, this historic preservation. Again, helping to figure out what does that mean, because one day I'll be long gone from here and someone's going to have to know what we all meant by historic preservation. We'll all be long gone. I'll also move on to something else. But someone needs to know what is it we meant by historic preservation and what does that mean to our community and to us as a group. Several changes. Again, this is just kind of categorizing them. I'm not going to read through them all, but just a lot of different things on safety related, roads, connectivity, infrastructure. Some mentions there in collaborations with the entities, which is great because that's why we're all here today. Why we're all in this committee to make some of that happen. And then a different ideas kind of in the same vein. But again, you should have a copy of kind of starting from this slide, I think, onward towards the end to try to kind of review that feedback as y'all go into your further discussions. Just to give you a breakdown on what that feedback looks like. So again, they pick a point. They're selecting that point individually. It's not something that we reference to them. They put in their comment. They can type it in. They can put what it is, a change, a keep, an idea, and then again, it is time stamped, so we know it is date and timed. But it does not reference who they are or where they're at. No IP addresses or any crazy stuff like that. Just another example of a different comment. So again, just to go through the feedback specifically from the kickoff meeting back on January 28th, where we kind of intro the project. We walked the groups through, for those who weren't here or unfamiliar, we went through a visioning exercise where the tables kind of went through an exercise led by staff or facilitated by staff. And then kind of came up with their own vision for each group. They then walked through kind of a SWOT level analysis on the area, and then a mapping exercise, which again we coordinated into the last image there. So again, when we went through that process, here's just and I'm not going to read this, but we tried to look through. We ran a lot of the feedback through different analysis to try to figure out kind of word frequency, idea frequency, and what that looked like. Again, this is taking into account online comment feedback, which I think was only in the couple of dozen. There wasn't a whole lot of online feedback given directly into the comment platform online, but certainly lots of comments mentioned when we had that kickoff meeting. And so just some key themes, if you will, that came up through that process. Parking obviously was the number one mentioned thing. That included everything though, from the availability of it, having more of it, not having enough of it, where can you access it? We need more we need more ability to access that parking. And then management of how different parking structures are done. Could be everything from, the parking meters to time in the surface lot, parking garage metrics, it could be all of that. Connectivity was a heavy mention, and just transportation in general. Obviously, there was, as we've kind of what brought us all here today and to this committee is just the idea of the community and the atmosphere and keeping that preservation was kind of some high mentions as well. And then certainly the Northgate, as we've now delineated as specifically that entertainment district, talked about a lot too. And so then we took into account kind of what was we want to look at the sentiment. And so this is, I will say these are leans. I use lean very likely. Basically, the way that the scale works is it is a -1 to 1. If you hate us, it's a -1. If you love us, it's a 1. If you don't really care, you're in the middle. And that's per each of these words, right? And so generally speaking, nothing was heavy weighted, I would say, one way or the other when we averaged them all out. This kind of just shows you when the people had comments on what's going on in the area, this was their thoughts where they leaned on that matter. So certainly people had and a good way to think about this, people love the fact that it's an entertainment district, or they tend to like the fact it's an entertainment district in the area. They tend to not like parking area or parking availability or parking X in the area is a good way to kind of read through this chart. And so same thing when we talk about safety, people tend to feel that safety in the area is negative. They have a negative sense of safety going on within the boundary. And again, these sentiments and these phrases take from the entirety of the district, but obviously note that the comments, as you can see in the previous map, are pretty centered in one specific area. So take that into how you consider the information as it's presented to. Apparently nobody does like me because regulations had a pretty negative sentiment, but that's okay. We'll get there. But again, you can see kind of the differences as we go in and out throughout all of it. Again, so what do people like? This was part of that SWOT analysis. So what were kind of the key things that were mentioned as they went through that exercise? Northgate, in the term, again, that we set, that term Northgate does mean Northgate, what we've defined it as, that it's a sense of place. They feel like it's a sense of place. Century Square was mentioned a lot, the history of the area, students, et cetera. And so you can see here how often words were kind of used in the different remarks that we got. So again, summarizing on the right-hand side, this is for y'all to kind of take in and take that back, look it over and get an idea. Again, this is to kind of get a feel on where the people who provided input, and some of that input is, you guys in this room, but obviously there were all kinds of people, all kinds of backgrounds that were here. And so trying to summarize that into a group for the committee to consider here. Same thing, what do people dislike? Lack of parking was probably pretty much the word. Again, the analysis picks up single word frequencies, not phrases. And so lots of things on lack of parking or lack parking, the city, Northgate, businesses, et cetera, as you go down the list. And then again, we kind of looked through those and tried to collectively figure out what we wanted to, how that was presented in the dislikes. So parking was a major frustration. People are worried with the maintenance and upkeep of the Northgate area, feel like it's dirty, it's not upkept very much. Concerns with that it's neglected in some areas, poor street conditions, certain instances on safety related to overcrowding, cost of living and business affordability was a mention as a challenge. And then just a lack of different amenities, so a lack of different options. It could be everything from restaurant uses, that there might be only bars in the area. There's no restaurant use at the same time, or vice versa. There's no clothing shop at the same time as, a grocer, for instance. And then opportunities. So what were identified by that initial kickoff group as opportunities for the area. Infrastructure and connectivity, that's a big one to probably, the first top two are probably big to consider because that's going to be what you're going to talk about a lot next time on March 1st or March 4th, sorry. They then talked about there's opportunities for putting in mixed use development, potential for higher density housing, redevelop underutilized areas, try to support local businesses, get some new commercial areas in there, preserve the history of existing landmarks out there and celebrate that. and potentially looking for placemaking opportunities, whether that be green spaces or gathering areas, et cetera. And again, we talked about challenges, same kind of thing here as before. I would take a keen look at infrastructure and transportation, because again, you're gonna be talking about that next week. But yeah, parking, obviously, we've talked about a lot. Congestion, road, kind of all the similar things I think you hear about with transportation issues. The big thing that we want to address and look at is connectivity with all the different developments that are on those different master plans. How do we make sure everything is integrated? Thoughts on challenges with, high rises, same concern with high rise. There's an opportunity there for mixed use, but maybe high rises aren't the right answer, right? So how do you balance that feedback that was given throughout the process? But again, so this is the same map you just saw a second ago. It just specifically parses out those that were done as a result of the exercise. So these are where the comments ranged that were talked about just a second ago. This is where those came from in that exercise. Obviously, there were additional added from the 17 to 20 or so people online, but this is just the map specifically of those in-person comments that we then put into the online map as well. So again, this was when we talk about things that people talked about, what they wanted to keep, what they wanted to change. And again, these are just kind of key words. Left-hand side is keep, right-hand side is things they wanted to change, and kind of what those look like. Not a whole lot of word frequency on those. Yeah, it could be as we go through the process and what are they want to keep. Obviously, Northgate, I think, is a growing sentiment of even a whole platform to keep Northgate, and so I think that one kind of makes sense. But different things that they thought for keep and change there. Yeah. Did you look at that? The what? Oh, yeah. It sounded like basically the city part was around relationships with the owners in the area, and I guess I think there was the earlier mention about transparency or lack of transparency, trust issues with PDS, ouch, and the city policies, et cetera, but things related to that. Almost were good people. Again, we talked about ideas. So this was different ideas that were presented throughout the mapping exercise. Similar stuff. I think a big thing that we've talked about as staff and something we identify too is yeah, some level of grocer in the area, something to keep it to where it's a work, play, and stay area. Is there potential for hotels? Was mentioned from the group. Affordable housing, additional housing, walkability, better lighting, safer areas to cross, et cetera, things like that. Again, kind of a lot more of the same, but again, just to give you some more information there on that feedback. The vision exercise, again, this is just how, when people talked about a vision, what they were wanting it to be. So it was actually a very, and we'll go over some more of the voting software here in a little bit, but there was a lot of good vision statements generated by all the different groups. A lot of thoughts about basically it being an entertainment district or a business area. So getting some commercial in there, making sure there's connectivity, wanting to preserve that history at the same time, realizing that we have parking concerns and wanting there to be housing opportunities for those to come. Kind of a quick summary. And so you have all of these vision statements in front of you. We'll give you a second here to probably read those. So what we're going to do, I don't know if it's the next slide. No, sorry. 2 slides from now, maybe. So this slide has all the group vision statements. So on the right-hand side, those groups individually, they created those statements as one of those 10 tables. They created these statements on the right. The left-hand side, the groups weren't necessarily able to, they didn't get to that point, or they didn't come to a consensus on a vision statement, but these were kind of those words that they used throughout the process of what was important to them. And I'll give y'all here a second to kind of read those as well. We provided staff-derived vision statements. So this was kind of looking at those groups that weren't able to put one together, but also all of them holistically. We generated 3 kind of different statements that were mentioned. It's also provided for you that you can read through, and please do in a second because we're going to talk about this. But basically, we want to know what the vision statement exercise is for. Is similar to like what the city has for policy guidelines, right? And so we want to generate something that, and kind of for the committee as a whole, this will, in essence, be your direction or how you want to propose your direction moving forward. So obviously, as we get into the nuts and bolts in these future meetings where I'll shut up and stop talking and y'all can take over, y'all need a guiding principle, right? So there's something to help keep you guys focused on. You are going to have a lot of different opinions. You're going to have different desires. You're going to think of different things because you all come from different backgrounds. We want to make sure that as a committee, there is some level of alignment in what it is that you're looking to accomplish. And so basically when you come to a crossroad of two different ideas, that you can look back on this statement to help make sure that it is kind of in line with what it is that you're trying to achieve and what makes the most sense. Because there very well might be items that are kind of close to that 50-50, but one of them has to kind of win out when you talk about action items for us to take in as part of the plan. And so three different options that we can look at here. We can either have you guys vote on those 5 group ones and the staff ones, so that's 8 total. You can take a moment. I'll give y'all probably about 5 minutes or so to read through those. If this is the route you want to go, we can either take one of those. We can run y'all through as a committee, specifically the same exercise in essence, to basically come up with your own vision statement using these as background. Or y'all, if someone wants to take the hammer up, which I'm assuming you're not going to want to do this option, but I might be surprised. If someone wants to go and as a group, come up with vision statements, we can come back and vote on them at the next meeting. But this is basically to answer that question. It should update for you. You can rescan it if you need to. But again, would you like to vote on the 5 derived from your other kickoff members plus the 3 from staff, kind of trying to collect that, do an exercise on your own accord as a committee existing right now, or go home and kind of come up with your own vision statements and go from there? And if you pick option 1, I'm going to give you 5 minutes. Yeah, I would say if you take one of the derived ones, either from the groups that were previous, or if you take one of the staff ones, you can certainly come back as a committee, and if the majority wants to make an amendment or add something to it, I don't see that as any sort of issue at all. I think the benefit of, there's maybe pros and cons to each version of it. One of them obviously comes from, some of them were from your own individual groups. They might have been from your peers of this public. Could also be, again, staff try to do our best to summarize all those into 3 different options as well. But if you wanted to pick one of those options and then add to it, that's an option as well. If there's something in there you wanted to amend that to some degree, flexible on that for sure. And y'all can look at that down the road. I'm looking for some number over 30, because I know there was about 30-ish to 32 at one point that voted. But maybe I lost some. I'm looking for about, there in the top right, shows 29 people have answered. Well, there's 30. I knew that. All right, we'll give it 10 more seconds. Yes, sir. So I would say probably not. The cost is something that I think the vision statement isn't necessarily to talk about cost. It's about what is it you want to see in the area. It's probably not going to break down into we want a $20 million X, right? That's not really part of a vision statement necessarily. It's going to be what is it that we want to help align what we talk about to. So if the vision is that we want this to be an entertainment district, it makes no sense to do no commercial and no commercial additives to the plan or talk about commercial, not talk about commercial at all. It makes zero sense if we're trying to make this an entertainment district. So something like that, I think, is where we're looking for this to help align the group or get some sort of direction. It was a planning exercise to give you a thinking exercise in the future. If that helps. All right, so looks like the group wants to sit and talk about statements as their homework and come back and share them at the next meeting. So again, there is, which makes the rest of this meeting really easy. So with that, y'all can either just, if y'all are good, if y'all want to just go and take them and come back with something, I would say, yeah. Everybody hear that? So yeah, on this one, I think you don't have to rank. I think there's 15 items in there, give or take 10 now. Okay, yeah. So you don't have to rank all 10 of them. You certainly can, but you can put in your top 5, whatever. But you don't have to. It won't make you before you submit put all of them in there. And you'll select all of them, and then at the bottom there's like a submit or a send button, and that'll send them in. There's one more ranking, and then I'll close it out. Yeah. Yeah, so I would say that would be a very impossible thing, but it would be something long term. I mean, so I think if there was a vision for, that became this, they want this whole thing to be an entertainment district, and that meant no high rises in terms of the committee, right? And that was the outcome. That would be something where part of the action item potentially that was proposed is, one of the land use things is that they would want to adopt different land use regulations within the Northgate district to specify where residential and commercial entities could go, for instance, would probably be one avenue that we would propose if that was the case. And ultimately, that would have to be done by council. But yeah, anything that's in for development right now, anything before this plan was done, all that, I mean, it's all happening regardless. Yeah, I would say if an entertainment district doesn't necessarily have to exclude residential, right? It could be mixed in a certain way, or if there's a certain way when we get to that regulation conversation, what makes sense. It could be height caps or things that you can regulate but still promote mixes of uses, as was something mentioned in there, right? But yeah. It looks like there's one. Okay. I think we're done. So this information gets saved as part of the PowerPoint, so we'll have kind of a count for each of these different things. But obviously, again, for the committee, as y'all go through, and those of you who want to go back and come up with a vision statement for the group, this is, again, kind of your top six, seven, really, you can see seven down there, things that were done by your peers on the committee on what was important to them. And so kind of use these as part of when you make your vision statements. I would say if you could give us those in probably a week from now, so ideally by next Monday, and I'll send an email to follow up. But if you could get those to us by next Monday, so we can kind of compile those, and we'll do basically the same exercise. We'll send that out to the committee the week before that next weekend, so that you can see all of the different ones that were provided, and then we'll do the same system to vote on them at the beginning of the next meeting, so y'all can pick a vision statement out of that. So again, the next meeting will be March 4th. And so we'll put all the different master plans that we have that were shown individually, but also that collective map. We'll put that on the website, or send that to the committee directly, so y'all can have that. Kind of puts all of them on one page. Again, y'all have the homework now to go back and come up with vision statements if you so choose, and then those will be voted on. If we can't come to consensus, we'll just run y'all through the vision exercise and call it a day. So that'll be our contingency plan if we can't get some level of consensus there. But again, so the next meeting, again, we're going to start really turning it over to you guys as the committee. So this is, I'll open it up here in a second to any questions. But just to give you obviously a heads up, the next meeting will be basically talking about how is all of this interconnected from a bicycle, pedestrian, micromobility standpoint, from a transportation standpoint. How are all these things going to play with connectivity with one another, and what do y'all want to see there? And we'll basically have kind of some outlines on topics for y'all to discuss. And basically our goal will be, we'll provide you the topic, y'all will have a discussion about it, kind of back and forth, and then kind of as we land on consensuses from the committee using essentially the same software, because we can kind of do it on the fly, that'll help generate action items for us to put into the plan that'll ultimately be portrayed to y'all. That being said, I will not be at the next meeting. I will actually be on a honeymoon, so I will not be able to join you. But Jennifer Prohaska will be leading that effort from our side, so she'll be taking over for me and kind of helping running y'all through that. She's done this a heck of a lot more than I have, so y'all are in great hands. But with that, if there are any questions on existing condition data, we've always been taking notes on a couple of follow-ups that were asked throughout. But does anyone have any questions or information they'd like us to try to track down, or process-wise? Sir. Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, no, we can look into that. Yeah, the question for those online was just, when we talk about mobility, College Station used to be in an upper ranking for bicycle-friendly communities. And in essence, making sure, does that include micromobility as part of that process? Anybody have any other questions? And once, twice? Cool. So again, I'll be here if y'all have any direct questions you want to ask. I appreciate all y'all being here. We'll see y'all in 2 weeks to talk a little more specific, and make sure you do your homework.